John Pearson. I'm a consultant anaesthetist, and I'm going to be talking through the overall functions of the Eve TR ventilator that has just come into service for defence. So the Eve ventilator will come in its Pelly case. When you open it up, what you're looking for is initially the power cable, the high pressure oxygen tubing, which has a non-interchangeable screw thread and a Schrader valve for attaching to our oxygen cylinders, the ventilator itself, and the ventilator should have a cover screen over the front of it. Then inside there'll be a manual. Added to that is a spare cover for the battery compartment at the back, a low pressure oxygen attachment, and lastly there will be a spare coarse filter which should come with every machine. So first of all, we're going to look through the back of the machine. The power supply itself is a 24 volt power supply. It has a dust cover on. On the power supply itself, it has a little notch on here which allows it to connect onto the power supply, and then it has a button that you press to release the power supply, and that will charge the internal battery and the external battery when it's attached. The internal battery has a life of around about 4 hours when fully charged. The external hot swappable battery has another 4 hours of charge, and also if you press the button on the back, that will give you an indicator of how much charge is left in this machine, in this battery. It also has a supply here so that you can charge this from the power supply cable if you had extra batteries. This then clips back in. Also on the back there is a fuel cell that is behind here. There are 2 clips which can be unscrewed and then tightened, and these will allow you to hang it on the edge of a bed if required. There is a carrying handle which you will see the other side when we look at the front. So now we're going to look at the right hand side of the machine, and in particular where the filters lie. So here I've got 2 machines, one with the filter cover removed and one with the filter cover still in place. The filter cover is held on by a T10 screw, so you'll need a specialised screwdriver to remove it, and that screw is just in here. Behind the cover itself will be 2 different filters. There is a circular HEPA filter which just fits in to the groove there, and then there is a coarse filter which sits behind the grill itself, and that will just clip into place here and then screwed back in. On receiving the machine, please ensure that you do have a HEPA filter attached, and if required, if it's missing, then order a filter pack which has an NSN number and you'll get both filters in. The HEPA filter should be changed yearly, and this is usually done by MDSS, but you might have local procedures where it is changed by yourselves. The coarse filter again should be changed every year, but again in certain climates like dusty or dirty areas this might be changed more regularly and will be dependent on local SOPs. There are 3 ways of delivering oxygen. Firstly, using the low pressure adapter, you can either use an oxygen concentrator or an oxygen cylinder using some bubble tubing onto the low pressure oxygen adapter. It's important though that when you're using the low pressure oxygen that you set in your settings that you're using low pressure oxygen, and if you are using the oxygen concentrator that you do tell it that you're using oxygen 93 or 93% oxygen. If you're not going to use low pressure oxygen, you'll be utilising the high pressure oxygen hose, and you'll then swap this onto the lower connector using the non-interchangeable screw thread, and then attach this using your Schrader valve. There is also on this machine a quick coupling device, but is not in use in this country. So on the opposite side of the Eve is where you connect your circuits. Now currently there are 3 main circuits that we're using, and they come in slightly different packages. We have a single limb circuit, a dual limb circuit, and then if you're using it alongside the DPO2 anaesthetic machine, you'll have a slightly different circuit with no actual circle in there. On this side of the machine, CO2 and SpO2 have not been activated in the defence configuration of this ventilator. There are 3 then ports to allow connections of any of the 3 circuits that are used. first of all, the inspiratory port. Second of all, the flow sensor, and on the flow sensor itself it has a little dot which matches the black dot on the inspiratory limb. It will only fit one way, and this just clips in. And then on the expiratory sensor, which may come in slightly different ways, this will have a notch which matches the notch of the expiratory side, and that will clip in there. It will only fit one way. Just to the side here, there is also a nebulizer function which allows you to nebulize in a circuit if attached to high pressure oxygen. So the front of the machine has a ruggedized edge to protect it from any bashes. It has a carrying handle across the top which also incorporates an LED light which will flash either red or yellow depending on the alarms that have been activated on the machine itself. There are some clips to allow attachment also to a strap if required. The buttons across the front, power button which allows you to turn on or off. There are 3 quick start buttons. There is a neonate button which has been deactivated in the military ventilator, a pediatric fast start button and an adult fast start button. Lastly is the silence button which will provide a silence for up to 2 minutes. Here there are some lights which will light up when connected to various different things. First of all, the power light, which if connected to power will turn green. If high pressure oxygen is connected, this will turn green. And the battery lights, which will turn from green to yellow to red to flashing red, depending on their charge status. There is an internal and an external battery showing up here. There is also a front cover which clips in and off just to protect the front screen when not in use. So before any use, you will always conduct a 373, and we have a separate video and also a checklist that you will follow prior to actually starting this machine up. At this stage, what I'm going to do is turn the power button on and allow the machine to run through its self-test, which will take up to 70 seconds. Do note that I have a circuit connected, which is the only way you can get it through its self-test, and that we have capped off the end of the circuit itself, which must be done in all circumstances to ensure that it passes its self-test. As shown before, when we are connected to power, this will show up as having as a green light here to show we're connected to power, and because these batteries have more than 75%, they are currently showing as green on this side. The 3 fast-acting buttons, as previously stated, near has been deactivated. In pediatric, we've set this to a default setting in the military of pressure control, controlled mandatory ventilation. That has got a P-insp of 15, a respiratory rate of 20, and a PEEP of 5. On the adult mode, this is a pressure control, controlled mandatory ventilation, pressure regulated volume control. So it's set at a tidal volume of 500 mils, respiratory rate of 12 and no PEEP, which is a good starting point for anyone. So to activate these, what you'd end up doing is pressing the button for half a second. It will then turn green, and then once you've seen it green flashing, press it again and that will start that button. As you can see, it's now passed its self-test where all ticks have gone green, and therefore it says self-test passed. From this point, I'll click next to get to our default home screen. Now the ventilator has completed its self-test, you will also notice here that the oxygen, which is now also connected to high pressure oxygen, is now turned green. It will only do this once it's completed its self-test. So we'll now go through the fast-acting buttons on the right side. So the first button is the oxygen flush button. This can be preset in the settings, but can do up to a flush of 100% oxygen if connected to high pressure oxygen, and this can do it for a maximum of 3 minutes. The second button is an inspiratory hold. This can do an inspiratory hold at the end of inspiration for up to 15 seconds. When it's set in volume mode, this will do it in peak pressure, at the peak pressure set. In pressure control, it'll do it at the P-insp. You can also do a nebulizer. This can be preset for its determination of between 5 and 30 minutes. Again, this will only work when attached to high pressure oxygen, and that can be done in the settings menu. The last one is a day-night mode, which will dim the screen when pressed. The home screen will offer several different menus. First of all, you can repeat the self-test at any point if you change circuits, for example. You can click New Patient. This will give you the same options of starting a new patient as using the Quick Start buttons on the top, as previously stated what our default settings are. You can also click the mode settings, which will give you all the different ventilatory settings, whether it be invasive or non-invasive, and that could be then preset and confirmed and set in the background. There's also a sensor screen which will allow you to set the sensor depending on which circuit you are using. Lastly, you can start ventilation, and that will start what has been preset when you've gone into your mode settings. So now we're going to start ventilation using our fast acting buttons. So we'll press the adult fast start for half a second, it will flash green, press and confirm for another half a second, and that will start ventilation. Having a test lung attached at this stage is really advantageous to ensure that the ventilator can ramp up to the appropriate level. When we now look on the left hand side, this will give our values that have been measured. If you press the button directly underneath, this will cycle through various different values, and these can be pre-programmed via the settings button for the individual user as required. The next button along is the values button. This will give you a comprehensive set of measurements of patient values that, if you click through, will give you plenty of information, including compliance and resistance. There is an alarm section where you can set your alarm limits for your patient. The default settings for these will be slightly different depending on which ventilatory mode you have set, but at this stage it gives you the option of checking what those limits are, and also checking your alarm history, which will give you any previous alarms that have occurred. You can also get to the alarms history button by clicking the top right hand part of the screen, which will take you back into the alarms menu. By clicking the maneuver button, this will only allow a P01, which is used by some people for weaning purposes. Clicking the graph button will allow you to determine what graphs are shown on the screen, which can be altered depending on the viewpoint of the user itself. On the right hand side of the screen are all these set values by the user. You can click on them. This then changes the knob to an orange colour. This can then be changed, and then it must be confirmed by clicking the button to ensure that has been changed sufficiently, and this will then go green to confirm that change. This will include things like tidal volume or peak pressure, inspiratory-expiratory ratios, frequency, PEEP, and if using high flow oxygen, this will give you the FiO2 that is being set by the user. If you want to alter further parameters, click on the parameter button at the bottom, and this will give you more options, which includes things like pressure regulated volume control, which can be toggled on or off, and tube compensation if wanting to be turned on or off. Again, this must be confirmed by either pressing the knob here or pressing the confirm button. If you wish to change the ventilatory mode, click the button at the top. This will allow you to determine whether you want invasive or non-invasive modes. The machine will allow you to do volume control, pressure control, ventilation, and a spontaneous CPAP breathing, including CPAP pressure support. You'll also be able to use a duo-PAP mode, which is another term used for BiPAP, known by most other people. Clicking on the battery button will give you information about the state of charge of the batteries, how much time is left in the charge, the charging time if it's still less than 100% charged, and also the charging cycles themselves. So every 6 months you need to do battery maintenance. This involves completely discharging the batteries, both batteries, by running the ventilator, recharging them back up, and then discharging the batteries again. So a complete discharge and recharge on 2 occasions, and then charging the battery back to full power afterwards, and that will ensure that the batteries have a good battery life. So as previously stated, we can deliver oxygen in different ways. We can either use high pressure oxygen using the high pressure oxygen hose, or we can use low pressure oxygen using the low pressure oxygen adapter. But to ensure that happens effectively, we need to go into the settings menu to determine which way we're delivering that oxygen. So we will click on the settings button, go to setup, put in the code, which is 1968, click next, and then we'll click oxygen configuration. When both of these are deselected, this is set up for high pressure oxygen. If we want to use low pressure oxygen, we will tick LPO, and this will allow us to deliver low pressure oxygen from a cylinder using some bubble tubing. If we're going to use an oxygen concentrator, we also need to click the oxygen 93 button to ensure that we are telling the machine that we're using an oxygen concentrator. If high pressure oxygen is still attached and the machine is told that it's in low pressure oxygen mode, then with high pressure oxygen still attached, what will occur is eventually you'll get a high FiO2 reading on alarm on this, because the FiO2 is now reading at 73%. This is just another indicator to ensure that you disconnect your high pressure oxygen and switch to low pressure oxygen delivered either via your oxygen concentrator or via your cylinder. Here is your alarm, and you can see it's alarming on the LEDs as well. So when in low pressure oxygen mode, a key bit of information to remember is that your FiO2 delivered is determined by your oxygen flow through the ventilator, either from your oxygen concentrator or from your cylinder via bubble tubing. However, in this circumstances, the FiO2 still shows on this side. If you change this does not change what oxygen is being delivered to the patient. What it does do is change the alarm limits that are set on the machine. If I set this to 40% and then click on the alarms, it is noticeable that the upper limit has been set 10 above the setting I have set, so it's now set at 50 and 10 below at 30. It is appropriate then to set your alarm limits around what FiO2 is desired to be delivered from your oxygen concentrator or oxygen cylinder via bubble tubing. If doing a transfer, you may want to lock the touchscreen, press and hold the knob for 3 seconds. This will put a lock on here, and now the touchscreen is not active. If you do want to change a setting, you can actually twist the button still, click on it, make your change, and then confirm setting by pressing the knob again. To remove it out of lock for the touchscreen, press and hold the knob for another 3 seconds, and the touchscreen is now active again. It is possible to set this up in tactical mode, which will turn off all visual and auditory alarm and dim the screens completely. To do this, go into Settings, on System, Display, Tactical Mode, tick Tactical Mode, and you will see that the screen goes darker. It has turned off all visual alarms, but also it's turned off all auditory alarms. Ensure that you do this knowing that those alarms are now disabled. If you want to convert back, just untick the box, and that will re-engage all the previous alarms that have been set. When wanting to standby, press and hold the power button. A blue screen will come up to confirm standby, click confirm, and the machine will turn into standby. If you want to turn the machine off, press and hold the button, and it will turn the machine off completely. When wanting to use CPAP or CPAP pressure support, there are a few settings on here that you need to be aware of. Click on Mode Settings, click on CPAP, and click on Next. In its initial setup, there is no backup mode selected, but you are able to set up whatever PEEP you would require for the patient. If you do want a backup mode, you need to tick the box, and then the apnea time, trigger, ramp time, frequency, inspiratory, expiratory, and P-ints all become activated at that stage. A backup will put the patient into a pressure-controlled SIMV mode if they do not breathe for 9 seconds as set in this example. If you would like a pressure support added to the for the patient, click on PSV. You then need to select PSV, change the pressure support, which is that pressure above the PEEP, select it and confirm, and then before moving on to the next mode you must confirm to ensure that that is what you have selected. So the EVTR has a hierarchy of alarms. A low priority alarm is a blue alarm, a medium priority is a yellow alarm, and at this stage it will have a yellow LED show up in the handle. A red alarm, which is the highest priority, and that will have a overarching demonstration on the ventilator itself until that is fixed. So if we start in a ventilatory mode and then just do a disconnect, what you'll see almost immediately is a red alarm just demonstrating the disconnect. But as you can see here, there is also a yellow and a blue alarm that is going on, but the only alarm that is showing at the moment is the red alarm in the top corner. If you then click on that alarms, this will show you all three alarms, but the priority one is the red alarm at this stage because it is the highest priority. So that is the end of this short training video on the functions of the EVTR. This video is to be used in conjunction with other learning materials, including other videos, the manual that can give you complete details of the functions of the EVTR itself, and it does not replace any hands-on use and training on courses provided within Defence itself, including the Defence Anaesthesia Simulation course and the Defence Intensive Care Equipment course.